Negative. I can't hear it on YouTube. I can hear it in headphones here on Discord.
In his analysis of one of the most significant space discoveries in recent memory. The history and origins of the gas giant Saturn, and indeed the entire solar system, including our own planet, is not what we've been told. Planetary scientists
can see
recently
it
made
fine,
the
yeah, I just
astonishing
can't hear it.
discovery that water in Saturn's
Nobody.
satellites and
Oh,
rings is remarkably
wait!
similar
It
to
just came
water
on
on
now.
Earth. As Thornhill explained, this
Yeah, it just
discovery
came
was
on now. I can
explicitly
hear it.
predicted nearly 3/4 of a century ago by the scientific heretic Dr. Emanuel Velikovsky. It was Velikovsky's claim that only a few thousand
20 minutes,
years
half
ago,
an
a
hour.
period of
Half an
chaos
hour.
reigned in the solar system.
Yeah, you
One
did.
of the planets closely associated with Earth was Saturn, and watery filaments
I
rained
was
on our
calling for you
planet
for about
following
15,
Saturn's
20
violent
minutes.
flare-up. Decades later, based on the respective research of Dave Talbot and Eduardo Cardona, Thornhill developed his own model
I'll
of a
shut up now, so
primordially
let
close
display.
relationship between Earth and Saturn,
Yeah,
which was
it's
the
good, I
source
can
of
hear
all
it.
the water in our oceans, while leaving remnants in its rings. Today, Thornhill continues his presentation, shifting his focus to his own successful predictions for the Saturnian system, including the mysterious moon Titan.
Before I tell the epic story, a warning. Our
But I don't
education
hear your
systems train
voice, though,
students to
Greg.
memorize a litany of facts, which produces global groupthink. Students
Okay,
are not
there you
given
go.
the time
Never
or
mind, I'll shut up
encouragement
now.
to critically examine the history of ideas. A leading researcher into the learning functions of the divided brain, Dr. Ian McGilchrist, has shown such blinkered left hemisphere training renders students functionally blind to alternative ways of looking at a problem. The left hemisphere simply blocks out everything that doesn't fit with its take. It doesn't see it, actually, at all. So scientists with their narrow specialised training may look at but cannot see what to a non-expert may seem obvious. They will be the last to see a paradigm shift in the making. This is particularly evident for electrical phenomena in space. Even the Nobel Prize-winning founder of the idea of an electric universe, Hans Epstein, was ignored when he warned in his 1970 acceptance speech of an inevitable crisis in astrophysics if electric circuits in space are not recognised. Houston, we still have that problem after almost 50 years. I have lived since a teenager with uncertainty about accepted truths and learned to have the courage to challenge them. The result is not chaos, but a synthesis of ideas that explains the old ideas better and finds new ways of incorporating what seems a chaos of anomalies. And the best test is that of classical physics, simplification. The resulting paradigm shift is not a threat, but an invitation to the greatest adventure we may ever know, to begin to understand our real place in the universe for the first time. In our electric universe, stars and planets are formed at the same time inside molecular clouds, along a snaking cosmic lightning bolt. Gravity plays no role in the process. Since cosmic lightning takes the form of a twisted pair of current filaments, it is found that most stars are in pairs, or multiples. Planets will tend to do the same. Like the snaking filaments in a novelty plasma ball, the star-forming filament moves on, leaving a string of massive objects behind to gravitationally form the weird and theoretically challenging zoo of exoplanetary systems recently discovered. Some gas giant planets are subsequently formed in close orbits about a star that has ejected charged matter to achieve stability with a changed electrical environment. The ejection flares may account for the flickering of newborn stars, which can't be explained by gravitational accretion. This explains the unexpected hot Jupiters seen in large numbers closely orbiting other stars. The most numerous stars in the galaxy, brown dwarfs, which would appear reddish if they could be seen with the naked eye, are generally classed as failed stars, yet they have the baffling ability to produce massive stellar flares. This is simply explained because red stars don't have the ability of main-sequence bright stars to control their current by a transistor-like action in their photospheric plasma. A brown dwarf can only respond by discharging matter electrically. The capture process of a brown dwarf star involves flaring and ejection of charged matter by that body in order to achieve a new electrical equilibrium in its adopted family. That accounts for the large number of close orbiting moons of our captured gas giants in remote orbits. With this in mind, I want to take you back to just before the famous Cassini-Huygens space probe was to arrive at Saturn on July 1st, 2004. In news reports, Saturn was dubbed the original Lord of the Rings. There is a profound truth behind such a glib turn of phrase, but it wasn't until the advent of the telescope that Christian Huygens in 1656 was able to suggest that Saturn had a ring. So how do we explain the Saturnian ring symbolism that pervades our cultures? The halo of the saints, the royal crown, and the ring given in marriage are Saturnian symbols, as are the circled or Celtic cross, the Egyptian Ansate cross or Ankh, the Eye of Ra, and the astronomically baffling star inside the crescent. The star at the top of the lighted Christmas tree is pure Saturnian imagery. It is truly amazing that we are still haunted by prehistoric archetypes. It helps us to understand the extraordinary archetypal attraction of Tolkien's fantasy of Lord of the Rings. He was well versed in mythology. The following description of events is based on the surprisingly detailed and truly remarkable scholarship of Talbot and Cardona, which required explanations with the physics of an electric universe. Let's call our primordial star Proto-Saturn. It was an independent brown dwarf with its own entourage of satellites, including the Earth, Mars, and Titan. Proto-Saturn's dim reddish light was due to a glowing red anode plasma sheath, much larger than the Sun, enclosing Proto-Saturn and its inner satellites in a radiant cell. The term dwarf star is purely theoretical, since they are difficult to see and measure. In fact, NASA reported a brown dwarf which was radiating as if it had twice the expected surface area. The environment inside the radiant red shell is most hospitable for life on any enclosed satellites because there are no seasons and water is conspicuous in the spectra of such stars. Water misted down on this planet continually, and red light is ideal for photosynthesis, which explains the abundance of ferns and other vegetation globally in the Carboniferous era. But there is a catch. Brown dwarf stars are known to flare, sometimes to the extent, as one astronomer commented, that any satellites would suffer a very bad day. Such flaring by Proto-Saturn accounts for the geological strata and the fossil record of a number of global mass extinctions and instant burial of dismembered plant and animal remains. As we approached the Sun from deep space, our plasma sheath flickered like a faulty electric light when the two stellar plasma sheaths, or magnetospheres, began to clash. Proto-Saturn's galactic electrical power was usurped by the Sun, and its appearance changed dramatically. Before dimming forever, the dwarf star Proto-Saturn would have flared brilliantly like a comet, ejecting charged matter to relieve the electrical stresses caused by the sudden change in environment. Even now the former star has not completely cooled. Saturn still radiates more than twice the heat it receives from the Sun. And we have a simple explanation for the origin of Saturn's mysteriously short-lived water ice rings. As the Proto-Saturnian system approached the Sun in the outer solar system, our minor star's gravitational sphere of influence steadily shrank, and its outer satellites were progressively stripped away. This and the earlier capture of the other gas giants provides the source of trans-Neptunian objects, as they're known, including Pluto with its unexpected geology and atmosphere, and its peculiar moons. There is a simple physical characteristic that links a captured star with its offspring. It is the axial tilts. Like our close-orbiting moon, satellites tend to orbit their primary with the same face always turned toward it. If they orbit in the equatorial plane, their spin axis will be aligned with that of the primary. As gyroscopes, the satellites will retain the same tilt even if jolted from their orbit, although the process may induce a wobble of the spin axis. It is therefore highly significant that the two key planets identified in the ancient pantheons, Saturn and Mars, have axial tilts closely similar to that of the Earth. The tilt of Saturn at 27 degrees to the ecliptic plane is itself an enigma, unless it formed independently from the Sun. Venus was described as a spectacular discharging body in the ancient congregation of planets. It can be explained if Venus was ejected in the flare-up of Proto-Saturn and the infall of the stream of ejected matter from swiftly rotating Proto-Saturn gave Venus a slow retrograde spin. The magnitude of the axial tilt of Venus to the ecliptic is much less than Saturn's, which suggests that Venus was ejected from a low latitude. This accounts for the hellish temperature and new surface of Venus, having been recently spat from the mantle of a brown dwarf star. Its filamentary equatorial scars caused by spectacular radial discharging, and its thick atmosphere inherited from the brown dwarf and subsequently modified by interplanetary and cometary discharges. Venus still has a cometary magnetotail stretching to the Earth's orbit, and its mountain tops glow with plasma discharges, which return Magellan's radar signals as unexplained shininess. Magellan's radar also showed Venus has a surprisingly young surface that gave rise to ad hoc theories of resurfacing events. They're unnecessary. Venus is a baby. Since my predictions were written in 2004, the electrogravity model has been further developed, and it explains electrogravitational capture and the rounding of cometary orbits by electrical discharge. It explains the huge capture cross-section of stars and why the observed phenomenal discharging of cometary Venus caused it to finally have the most circular orbit of any planet. The electric universe conceptual model can claim a number of successful predictions. Significantly, it was the only model to predict the surface features of smog-shrouded Titan before the Huygens probe revealed them in detail. Titan, which is 50% larger than our Moon, is an enigma for astronomers, having a global orange haze that has prevented us from seeing surface features. It has a massive atmosphere, mainly of nitrogen, with a pressure at the surface like that at the bottom of a swimming pool. The atmosphere also contains methane and at least 9 other organic molecules. The methane is being continually destroyed by solar radiation, which raises a further problem about its source of resupply if the Moon is 4.6 billion years old. This has led to widespread speculations of Titan possibly being covered by an approximately 1 kilometre deep ocean of liquid ethane. However, radar, infrared and radio observations of Titan have not found signs of a hydrocarbon ocean. In fact, one radar return was of a type that we would expect to get back from Venus. But Titan is not 4.6 billion years old, and the Earth did not form where we find it today. Instead, Saturn's largest moon, Titan, is a child of Saturn and a sibling of Venus, Earth and Mars. I wrote just before Cassini arrived at Saturn, "We should be alert to similarities between Titan and Venus." On November 29, 2006, the Dallas Morning News reported, when the $3 billion Cassini spacecraft sailed past Titan 3 weeks ago, it was supposed to clear up many of the mysteries about Saturn's largest moon. Instead, it has left scientists more befuddled. The new Cassini images do not support previous theories about Saturn's moon. In New Scientist of November 6, 2004, Titan images add to Moon's mystery, Stephen Battersby reported. The world got its first peek at the surface of Saturn's moon Titan last week. The images were taken as NASA's Cassini-Huygens spacecraft swept past the moon. The images show a landscape that is clearly still being shaped. Although Titan must have suffered numerous meteor impacts in the past, its surface today is largely crater-free. Somehow these scars must have been eroded or filled in. "We are seeing a place that is alive, geologically speaking," says Charles Ilachi, head of the team running Cassini's radar instrument. I commented at the time, "That is precisely what was said about Venus when the Magellan orbiter revealed that planet's surface. It is only supposition that Titan's surface is still being shaped. It's based on the belief that Titan must have suffered numerous meteor impacts in the past, and therefore something must have occurred from within the moon to fill the craters. However, like Venus, there may have been no impact craters to fill. For that matter, no one has witnessed a large crater forming meteor impact. The report continued, suggestions of an active dynamic surface on Titan are beginning to emerge. Not a single crater has been identified yet, which means the surface must be young and active. One large circular feature, suspected of being a crater until closer examination showed it to be flat, closely resembles the pancake domes seen on Venus that are produced by magma welling up to produce a bubble that then slumps down to a nearly flat profile. Other features resemble the lobes of some surface lava flows. We don't understand what we're looking at. Titan is going to be a real challenge. My comment was, the surprise about the lack of craters and Titan's apparent active dynamic surface mirrors the comments made about Venus when radar images were first returned. The large, flat, circular feature on Titan does resemble the pancake dome seen on Venus. However, these domes were not formed by volcanic action. It would require an unacceptably large number of coincidences to produce such circularity in just one of these domes. The surface must be absolutely horizontal and the flow from the central vent must be perfectly even in all horizontal directions. But there are many domes on Venus. In the electric universe model, the domes are more simply explained as the raised blisters sometimes caused by lightning. Small-scale circular raised blisters have been found following a negative cloud-to-ground lightning strike to a lightning conductor cap. They're called fulgurites. A test of this hypothesis would be to determine if the surface around these domes is sunken. Fulgurites show this characteristic borrow pit effect where the material has been drawn inwards and upwards by the intense discharge to form the raised blister. It is not something to be expected from a volcanic upwelling. Inexplicably, in terms of the volcanic model, where two domes overlap, the relief of the underlying dome doesn't disturb the overriding dome. This, and the chain formation seen above, is typical of electrical scarring in general, where one crater is often centred on the rim of another, with little disturbance of the existing crater. With fulgurites, one mound often occurs on top of another as a result of multiple strokes within the lightning flash. So it seems that the images of Titan's surface returned by Cassini so far are predictable based on forensic evidence that we should be alert to similarities between Titan and Venus. This brings us to the other major puzzle about Titan, its atmosphere. Titan's atmosphere is believed by many scientists to be similar to Earth's early atmosphere, billions of years ago. Toby Owens, principal scientist at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, said, "What we've got is a very primitive atmosphere that has been preserved for 4.6 billion years. Titan gives us the chance for cosmic time travel, going back to the very earliest days of Earth when it had a similar atmosphere." From New Scientist, November 6, Titan appears to have lost much of its original atmosphere. The Moon has an unusually high abundance of nitrogen-15 compared with the lighter isotope nitrogen-14. That could be explained if most of the atmosphere had evaporated into space, a process in which the nitrogen-14 would have escaped more easily than nitrogen-15. What could cause such a loss is unknown, but it would mean that Titan once had an atmosphere 40 times as thick as Earth's, making it a dwarf version of a gas planet. This bizarre world may be far more complex than we have begun to imagine, says Larry Soderblom of the US Geological Survey in Flagstaff, Arizona. My comment was, Titan's atmosphere is primitive, but not in the sense that it remains 4.6 billion years old. Instead, there has not been time for young Titan to lose much atmosphere. If Titan, like Venus, is a young, recently ejected body, it may still be cooling from its natal heat, and, like Venus, it has a super-rotating wind. The striking disparity in nitrogen isotopes is telling us something about the way planetary atmospheres are formed, rather than how they evolve. There are several processes during birth in an electrical discharge that will have significant effects on planetary atmospheres, including that of Titan. The primary effect comes from the source and depth of the ejection from the flaring parent dwarf star or gas giant. The chemical elements in the discharge are then sorted according to their critical ionization velocity. Also, isotopes will tend to separate in the magnetic field of the plasma discharge. Lastly, the plasma gun effect, seen now ejecting material from Io's so-called volcanoes into space, is known in the laboratory to be a copious source of neutrons. The neutrons may be captured to form heavy isotopes and radioactive elements. The variable combination of all these effects suggests that it would be unlikely for any two bodies in the same family to have identical initial atmospheres. Subsequent electrical interactions between planets and moons would also serve to transfer surface materials and atmospheres, transmute elements, and further complicate the picture. That fits generally with the irregular elemental and isotopic signatures found in the atmospheres of our planetary system. For example, nitrogen in lunar soils is 10 times more abundant than one may expect from the concentrations of solar wind rare gases. There are some other mechanisms that could also contribute to the lack of nitrogen-14 in Titan's atmosphere. For example, nitrogen-14 can capture an electron to become carbon-14. Carbon-14 decays by very weak beta decay back to nitrogen-14 with a half-life of approximately 5,730 years. If the age of Titan's atmosphere can be measured in tens or hundreds of thousands of years instead of billions, then a significant amount of nitrogen-14 may still be locked up as carbon-14, contributing perhaps to the hydrocarbons in Titan's atmosphere and on its surface. To suggest Titan once had an atmosphere 40 times as thick as Earth's, making it a dwarf version of a gas planet, only complicates the plainly impossible standard model of formation of the solar system. Why don't other large moons in the outer solar system have substantial residual atmospheres? It seems far more plausible to suggest that Titan is a much newer moon than Jupiter's Ganymede or Callisto. Titan simply hasn't had time to lose its heavy atmosphere, just as Saturn hasn't had time to lose its rings following its last discharge. In this picture, we now have the key to understanding what shapes Titan's landscape, said Dr. Martin Tomasco, principal investigator for the Descent Imager Spectral Radiometer, adding, "Geological evidence for precipitation, erosion, mechanical abrasion, and other fluvial activity says that the physical processes shaping Titan are much the same as those shaping Earth." These comments demonstrate the problem of interpretation when the model is geocentric. Methane is a non-polar molecule which doesn't form clouds and rain like electrically polarized water molecules do. So precipitation, erosion, and other fluvial activity will not occur, much the same as those shaping Earth. Finally, returning to Venus, why is its atmosphere so different to the other planets and Titan? The atmosphere of Venus is mostly carbon dioxide, 96.5% by volume. Most of the remaining 3.5% is nitrogen. This inhospitable mix is accompanied by clouds of sulfuric acid. I explained in my 2004 article, Venus probably began with an atmosphere more like Titan's and the Earth's, where nitrogen dominates and with more water. On the Venusian surface, nitrogen molecules require very little energy to transmute to carbon monoxide molecules by a catalytic surface nuclear reaction in the presence of red-hot iron. The brilliant French chemist Louis Kervran, when investigating carbon monoxide poisoning of welders, discovered this surprising transmutation. The carbon monoxide then reacts at the hot surface of Venus with water vapour to form carbon dioxide and hydrogen, in a well-known industrial process. The hydrogen produced escapes from Venus. This process explains the puzzling discovery made by Venus landers that the water vapour concentration diminished as they approached the Venusian surface. But decisively, it explains the heavy carbon dioxide atmosphere and little remaining nitrogen on Venus. It also explains the steady stream of hydrogen escaping from the top of Venus's atmosphere at present and the phenomenally high proportion, 120 times that on Earth, of heavy hydrogen or deuterium left behind in its atmosphere. What I've attempted to show here is a coherent story using forensic evidence stretching back into prehistory of celestial events involving planets and their electrical thunderbolt interactions. A new picture of the universe results from paying heed to Alfvén's warning to introduce electric universe science into cosmology. This is a fundamental shift from the ad hoc theoretical approach, which has no theory explaining the force of gravity, and so, unsurprisingly, no success trying to introduce order into a chaos of anomalies. It has no chance of ever discovering that we are children of the planet and former brown dwarf star, Saturn. This is an invitation to the greatest adventure, to begin to understand our real history and place in the universe for the first time, and that must bring about a much-needed cultural change that may dwarf the scientific revolution. That change is essential if we are to have a future, because the post-traumatic stress disorder we have inherited threatens our very existence on this planet. It manifests as a desire not to know the shocking truth because it exposes our existential fears. As Roger Westcott ably expressed it, "Man is a wounded animal. His survival is astonishing, but his inability to heal his wounds is tragic." It is tragic because, as Velikovsky argued, being descendants of the survivors of great paroxysms of nature of the past, we are possessed by the urge inherited through racial memory to repeat the violent performance. And it was his greatest fear that we now had the destructive capability to produce our own doomsday. Along with that genius Carl Jung, he warned that mankind is his own worst enemy. So the cultural change offered by electric universe cosmology is essential for our survival. By offering a real understanding of the universe and our history, it offers hope and inspiration where presently there is none. There is far more to life in the electric universe than is dreamt of presently. We are all intimately connected with each other and the Earth. Enjoy the Saturnian Festival of Lights and the New Year.
Was Saturn the sun? Seems like a good question. Was Saturn the sun in ancient times, or seen in history and mythology skies as the sun-like object? The Saturn theory, through comparative mythology, Roman Saturnalia festival, etc., suggests that Saturn may have been our first sun, or at least associated as our star. This is explored through David Talbot's Saturn myth, and perhaps starting to be explained through the Saturnian cosmologies of the Thunderbolt's electric universe theory, Alfred de Grazia, and other Immanuel Velikovsky-inspired catastrophism models and revised chronology. These diagrams of some proposed Saturn polar configurations may help visualize initially mind-bending concepts. The Sun and Saturn are two very different celestial objects, yet the Babylonians appeared to confuse the two. Or was it just the translators of the Babylonian texts? Thomson, in his introduction to his collection of astrological reports, has noticed that the planet Saturn was also designated as Samas, i.e., sun, by the Babylonian Assyrian astrologers, and he quotes the statement of Hyginus to the effect that Saturn was called the star of the sun and catastrophism. Saturn was named after the Roman god of agriculture and harvest. While the planet may have gotten its name from its golden color, like a field of wheat, it also had to do with its position in the sky. According to mythology, the god Saturn stole the position of king of the gods from his father Uranus. The throne was then stolen by Jupiter. Mythology of Planets, Universe Today. The Chaldewang Bonpuri Chronicles of Shanjilong is a Korean creation myth, traditionally retold by shamans in the small island of Jeju-do. Despite its title, the supreme deity Chijewang, whose name means King of the Heavens and of Earth, serves mainly as a secondary character. The protagonists of the myth are instead the two sons of Shanjiwang, Great Star and Small Star. Shanjiwang Bonpuri, Wikipedia. Other peoples' EU variations also suggest different solar system configurations in our planet's recent history. Our gas giants that are brown dwarf-type stars everywhere else, and other planets perhaps usurping other planet kings for a short period or reflecting and basking in their glory. During Saturnalia festival period, around Christmas time, the roles of Roman households were reversed, with slaves becoming the master, in remembrance of when Saturn recently ruled the skies. It was a golden age. In a poem about a lavish Saturnalia under
Domitian,
Statius makes it clear that the emperor, like Jupiter, still reigns during the temporary return of Saturn, King of Saturnalia, Wikipedia. And the overthrow of Saturn symbolizes the demise of the old culture which worshipped this ancient god. According to Roman mythology, after Saturn was dethroned by his son Jupiter, Zeus, he hid himself,
Latuit,
in the countryside, called Latium, in his honor. At the invitation of the god Janus, he reigned together with his wife. Is that her name, really? Ops, over Rome's golden ages, bringing prosperity, abundance, and civilization. The Romans nostalgized that legendary state as the golden age of Latium. Many of the rites of the Saturnalia were intended to restore that long-lost utopia, if only for a short time each year. Saturnalia recalling an ancient age. Was Saturn the original sun? Was Saturn a brown dwarf star where planet Earth resided during the Golden Age? Perhaps during the Saturn polar configuration. And yet the profile of the great sun gods presents a fascinating dilemma. During the past century, several authorities noticed that Greek and Latin astronomical texts show a mysterious confusion of the sun, Greek Helios, Latin Sol, with the outermost planet, Saturn. Though the designation seems bizarre, the expression star of Helios or star of Sol was applied to Saturn. Of the Babylonian star worshippers, the chronicler Diodorus writes, "To the one we call Saturn they give a special name, sun star." Similarly, the Greek historian Nonus, gives Kronos as the Arab name of the sun. Though Kronos meant only Saturn and no other celestial body, Hyginus, in listing the planets, names first Jupiter, then the planet of Sol. Others say Saturn. A Greek ostracon, cited by the eminent classicist Franz Boll, identifies the Egyptian sun god Ra, not with our sun, but with the planet Saturn. This repeated confusion of the sun and Saturn seems to make no sense at all. Can you imagine any difficulty in separating the two bodies or distinguishing the one from the other? One fact beyond dispute is that the word Helios did come from the Greek word for our sun, just as the Latin Sol gave his name to our sun. The same can be said for the older Shamash and Ra. The names of these gods became the names of the solar orb. But that's where the connection with our sun ends, and the mystery of Saturn, the universal monarch, begins. As strange as it may seem, early astronomical traditions identify the primeval sun as the planet Saturn, the distant planet which alchemists called the best sun, and which the Babylonians, the founders of astronomy, identified as the exemplary light of heaven, the sun god Shamash. Shamash is the planet Saturn. The astronomical texts say, in archaic copies of Plato's
Timaeus.
The word for the planet Saturn is Helios, the sun god. Popular Greek tradition identified Saturn as Kronos, alter ego of Helios, and Kronos is said to have ruled over the pole. But only a handful of scholars have bothered to trace the parallel reference in other cultures, or to address the unanswered questions. Saturn in ancient times, thunderbolts. Picture of the day. The Popol Vuh, lauded as the Mayan Bible, attests to the same idea. There, a previous sun god is described as follows. Like a man was the sun when it showed itself. We've heard this before. It showed itself when it was born and remained fixed in the sky like a mirror. Certainly it was not the same sun which we see, it is said in their old tales. The Saturn myth, maverick science. A golden race of mortal men who lived in the time of Kronos, when he was reigning in heaven, and they lived like gods, without sorrow of heart, remote and free from toil. Miserable age rested not on them. What happened to them? Works and Days, Hesiod, Velikovsky Archive. Peoples that remembered early tragedies enacted in the sky by the heavenly bodies asserted that Jupiter drove Saturn away from its place in the sky. Before Jupiter, Zeus became the chief god. Saturn, Kronos, occupied the celestial throne. And in all ancient religions, the dominion passes from Saturn to Jupiter. In Greek mythology, Kronos is presented as the father and Zeus as his son, who dethrones him. Kronos devours some of his children. After this act, Zeus overpowers his father, puts him in chains, and drives him from his royal station in the sky. In Egyptian folklore or religion, the participants of the drama are said to be Osiris, Saturn, brother and husband of Isis, Jupiter, the worship of Saturn in the beginning, Emmanuel Velikovsky, and I've read that. I may read it again. Here is a remarkable fact. Though numerous figures of the universal monarch are translated conventionally as the sun god, the celestial power invoked by the world's first religion is not the body we call the sun today. In fact, the star worshippers specifically distinguished it from our sun by calling it best sun, the primeval sun, the central sun. There has to be something to it. Of course, you know, the water and oxygen and salt matched as well on the scientific side. Natives of Mexico recall that prior to the present age, an exemplary sun ruled over the world. But this was not the sun of today. His name, Quetzalcoatl. Quetzalcoatl. The Maya maintained essentially the same idea, calling the primeval sun Hurricane. The Incas of Peru spoke of a former superior sun to the present sun. The ancient Egyptians, the sun god Atum-Ra, the model ruler, reigned over the fortunate area for a time, then retired from the world. The Sumerian An, ruling with terrifying splendor, was the central luminary in the sky, but not our sun, and later departed to a more remote domain. to a more remote domain. When it comes to the well-known sun gods of early man, nothing in the mythical record seems to have unnerved the experts. As to the original solar character of the Greek Helios, Latin Sol, Assyrian Shamash, or Egyptian Ra, scholars have maintained an unwavering confidence. And surely you can see why. Could it really be doubted that Helios, radiating light from his brow, is our sun? Saturn, the ancient sun god, David Talbot. Saturn did not move on its present remote orbit, but ruled as the central sun around which the other heavenly bodies visually revolved. The words used by ancient civilizations that are interpreted today as the sun, like the Egyptian Ra, the Greek Helios, and the Roman Sol, all originally referred to the gas giant Saturn. Was that planet our primordial parent? Was Saturn until recently a much larger brown dwarf? The apparent size and color of an electric star is an electrical phenomenon. If Jupiter's magnetosphere was lit up, it would appear the size of the full moon. Was ancient man around to see it as a sun? If not, why would anyone call a faint yellowish speck in the night sky the sun? Other stars, other worlds, other life, hollow science. Kronos was confused with, or perhaps consciously identified with, due to the similarity in name, the Titan Kronos, already in antiquity, the identification becoming more widespread during the Renaissance, giving rise to the allegory of Father Time wielding the harvesting scythe or sickle. He was depicted in Greco-Roman mosaics as a man turning the zodiac wheel, Kronos. However, also be contrasted with the deity Ion as eternal time. Kronos is usually portrayed through an old wise man with a long gray beard, such as Father Time. In Greek mythology, Kronos, in pre-Socratic philosophical works, is said to be the personification of time. He emerged from the primordial chaos. He is often mythologically confused with the Titan Kronos. He was depicted in Greco-Roman mosaics as a man turning the zodiac wheel. Often the figure is named Eon, eternal time, a common alternate name for the god. His name actually means time, and is alternatively spelled Kronos, Khronos, transliteration of the Greek Kronos, or Cronus, Latin version, Saturn in mythology. Now, even though Velikovsky points out that Saturn was once much more massive body than it is today, it is hard to imagine that it could have been massive enough to be a star in the context of the thermonuclear theory of stellar energy. If, however, it was an electrically fueled star, its initial stellar state and its sudden demise seem readily explainable. Ralph Jurgens, Earth is a Satellite of Saturn, Velikovsky Archive. In fact, it may well be both Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter and Saturn were at one time minor stars, and that their satellite systems were formed as the result of minor or planetary nova outbursts. C. R. Bruce, A New Approach in Astrophysics and Cosmology.
There's nothing to fear. gas giant Saturn. It's the outermost planet visible to the naked eye, moving on an orbit almost 900 million miles from the Sun. For those untrained in finding planets in the night sky, it could hardly be said that Saturn stands out amongst its starry companions. This lack of distinction underscores an unsolved mystery. Where did all of the extravagant images attached to this distant speck in the sky come from? The story of Saturn as creator. Saturn presiding over a lost golden age. Saturn as a primeval sun. Saturn's preposterous location at the celestial pole around which the heavens visually turn. Saturn as the founding father of kings. And Saturn as dying or displaced god. In due course, we'll take up the god's connection to an immense crescent, seen as a scythe or sickle turning in the sky. So too the cosmic mountain, from which Saturn was said to have once ruled the world. And the planet god's role as divine ancestor of different nations, all recounting the same core idea. The mysteries will quickly overwhelm a researcher the moment he asks the present sky to explain the ancient themes. In fact, many scholars simply walked away from the dilemma. Here's the dilemma in a nutshell. The myths appear to be much older than any recorded observations of planets. The first flowering of the monumental civilizations occurred in an environment of myth and magic. There are no lists of planets, no diaries of planetary motions. The celebrated gods do not look at all like the planets we know so well today. So most scholars simply state that planetary behavior could not have provoked any of the great myths. The attachment of myths to planets must have come much later, perhaps in the first millennium BC. Our message, however, is that a radically different planetary arrangement prevailed in an earlier time. Planets, not in their present orbits, but planets, provoked all of the mythic archetypes. What we're offering in this series are reasons for known facts, things not disputed. This includes the fact that the astronomer priests themselves, in recording the tranquil and predictable motions of planets in later times, named these bodies explicitly as the great gods of the primeval epoch. And that's the heart of the dilemma. Why does the behavior of these most venerated gods so boldly contradict all observations of the named planets today? By working with the points of cross-cultural agreement, we'll see that the astronomical images of Saturn connect theme by theme with an archaic story told around the world, told long after most cultures had lost track of any planetary connections. The story says that in a former time, a central luminary, a motionless sun, turned as a great wheel in the sky. But why an identification with the planet Saturn? It's said that this ancient power, the father of kings, presided over an age of natural abundance and cosmic harmony. But this story, in its countless variations, does not end well. It states that the world fell into confusion when the ruling god fled the theater or tumbled from his appointed station. Then the hordes of chaos were set loose and all of creation slipped into a cosmic night, the gods themselves battling furiously in the heavens, the clash of the titans. In the well-known Greek tradition, this was the story of the displaced god Kronos, the father of kings. Kronos was the Greek name for the planet Saturn. And yet, enigmatically, the same planet was also named Helios, the sun, a fact that has perplexed classical scholars for a century and a half. The shadow cast by Saturn reached across the millennia. Even today, our language retains the age-old cultural ambivalence toward this most ancient god. The word Saturnian expresses the splendor of the Golden Age, while the word Saturnine reflects the melancholy of paradise lost. Guesses as to explanations will never work, but an explanation based on systematic, cross-cultural investigation will work, allowing a global story to mean what it says, even if that requires a measure of patience as verifiable pieces come one by one into a coherent picture of the ancient sky.
The worship of Saturn. Saturn, so active in cosmic changes, was regarded by all mankind as the supreme god. Seneca says that Epigenes, who studied astronomy among the Chaldeans, estimates that the planet Saturn exerts the greatest influence upon all the movements of the celestial bodies. On becoming a nova, it ejected filaments in all directions, and the solar system became illuminated as if by 100 suns. It subsided rather quickly and retreated into faraway regions. Peoples that remembered early tragedies enacted in the sky by the heavenly bodies asserted that Jupiter drove Saturn away from its place in the sky. Before Jupiter, Zeus became the chief god. Saturn, Kronos, occupied the celestial throne. In all ancient religions, the dominion passes from Saturn to Jupiter. In Greek mythology, Kronos is presented as the father and Zeus as his son, who dethrones him. Kronos devours some of his children. After this act, Zeus overpowers his father, puts him in chains, and drives him from his royal station in the sky. If Egyptian folklore or religion, the participants of the drama are said to be Osiris, Saturn, brother and husband of Isis, Jupiter. The cult of Osiris and the mysteries associated with it dominated the Egyptian religion as nothing else. Every dead man or woman was entombed with observances honoring Osiris. The city of Abydos in the desert west of the Nile and northwest of Thebes was sacred to him. Sais in the delta, used to commemorate the floating of Osiris' body carried by the Nile into the Mediterranean, what made Osiris so deeply ingrained in the religious memory of the nation that his cult pervaded mythology and religion. Osiris' dominion before his murder by Seth was remembered as a time of bliss. According to the legend, Seth, Osiris' brother, killed and dismembered him, whereupon Isis, Osiris' wife, went on peregrinations to collect his dispersed members. Having gathered them and wrapped them together with swathings, she brought Osiris back to life. The memory of this event was a matter of yearly jubilation among the Egyptians. Osiris became lord of the netherworld, the land of the dead. A legend, a prominent part of the Osiris cycle, tells that Isis gave birth to Horus, whom she conceived from the already dead Osiris, and that Horus grew up to avenge his father by engaging Seth in mortal combat. In Egyptology, the meaning of these occurrences stands as an unresolved mystery. The myth of Osiris is too remarkable and occurs in too many divergent forms not to contain a considerable element of historic truth, wrote Sir Alan Gardner, the leading scholar in these fields. But what historical truth is it? Could it be of an ancient king upon whose tragic death the entire legend hinged? Wondered Gardner. But of such a king, not a trace has been found before the time of the pyramid texts. And in these texts, Osiris is spoken of without end. There he appears as a dead god or king or judge of the dead. But who was Osiris in real life? Asked Gardner. At times he is represented to us as the vegetation which perishes in the floodwater, mysteriously issuing from himself. He is associated with brilliant light. After the life of studying Egyptian history and religion, Gardner confessed that he remained unaware of whom Osiris represented or memorialized. The origin of Osiris remains for me as insoluble mystery, nor could others in this field help him find the answer. The Egyptologist John Wilson wrote that it is an admission of failure that the chief cultural content of Egyptian civilization, its religion, its mythological features, again and again narrated and alluded to in the text and represented in statues and temple reliefs, is not understood. The astral meaning of Egyptian deities was not realized, and the cosmic events of their activities were not thought of. The prophet Ezekiel in the Babylon exile had a vision, the likeness of a man, but made of fire and amber, who lifted him by the lock of his hair and brought him to some darkened chamber where the ancients of the house of Israel, with censers in their hands, were worshipping idols portrayed upon the wall round about. Then the angel of the vision told him, "Thou shalt see greater abominations that they do." And he brought the prophet to the door of the gate of the Lord's house, and behold, there sat women weeping for Tammuz. Next he showed him also Jews in the inner court of the Lord's house, with their back toward the temple of the Lord, and their faces toward the east, that they worshiped the sun toward the east. The worship of the sun and the planets was decried by Jeremiah, a contemporary of Ezekiel. But what was this weeping for Tammuz? Tammuz was a Babylonian god. One of the months of the year, approximately coinciding with July, in the summer, was named in his honor. And by this very name, it is known in the present-day Hebrew calendar. Tammuz was the god that died and was then hidden in the underworld. His death was the reason for a fast, accompanied by lamentations of the women of the land. His finding or his return to life and resurrection were the motifs of the Passion. Tammuz was the god of vegetation, of the flood, and of seeds. The god Tammuz came from Armenia every year in his ark in the overflowing river, blessing the alluvium with new growth. In the month of Tammuz he was bound, and the liturgies speak of his having been drowned among flowers, which were thrown upon him as he sank beneath the waves of the Euphrates. The drowning of Tammuz was an occasion for wailing by women. The flood has taken Tammuz. The raging storm has brought him low. Of Tammuz, it is also narrated that he was associated with brilliant light, with descent into the netherworld, visited by Ishtar, his spouse. Tammuz's death, his subsequent resurrection, or his discovery in the far reaches, but no longer brilliant, were the themes of the cult that was not just one of the mysteries, but the chief and paramount cult. The Osirian mysteries, the wailing for Tammuz, all refer to the transformation of Saturn during and following the deluge. Osiris was not a king, but the planet Saturn, Kronos of the Greeks, Tammuz of the Babylonians. Babylonians called Saturn the star of Tammuz. After the deluge, Saturn was invisible. The sky was covered for a long time by clouds of volcanic dust. And the Egyptians cried for Osiris, and the Babylonians cried for Tammuz. Isis, Jupiter at that time, went in search of her husband, and Ishtar, also Jupiter at that early time, went to the netherworld to find her husband Tammuz. For a time Saturn disappeared, driven away by Jupiter, and when it reappeared, it was no longer the same planet. It moved very slowly. The disappearance of the planet Saturn in the netherworld became the theme of many religious observances. compromising liturgies, mystery plays, lamentations, and fasts. When Osiris was seen again in the sky, though greatly diminished, the people were frenzied by the return of Osiris from death. Nevertheless, he became king of the netherworld. In the Egyptian way of seeing the celestial drama, Isis, Jupiter, the spouse of Osiris, Saturn, wrapped him in swathings. Osiris was known as the swathed, the way the dead came to be dressed for their journey to the world of the dead, over which Osiris reigns. Similar rites were celebrated in honor of Adonis, who died and was resurrected after a stay in the Netherland, in the mysteries of Orpheus. Sir James G. Fraser, a collector of folklore, came to regard Osiris as a vegetation god. Likewise, he saw in the Babylonian Tammuz an equivalent of the Egyptian Osiris, a vegetation god, and carried away by this concept, wrote his The Golden Bow, built around the idea of the vegetation god that dies and is resurrected the following year. A few peoples, through consecutive planetary ages, kept fidelity to the ancient Saturn, or Kronos, or Brahma, whose age was previous to that of Jupiter. Thus the Scythians were called Uman Manda by the Chaldeans, people of Manda, and Manda is the name of Saturn. The Phoenicians regarded El Saturn as their chief deity. Eusebius informs us that El, a name used also in the Bible as a name for God, was the name of Saturn. In Persia, Saturn was known as Kevan or Kavan. The different names for God in the Bible reflect the process of going through many ages in which one planet superseded another and was again superseded by the next one in the celestial war. El was the name of Saturn, Adonis of the Syrians. The bewailed deity was also like Osiris, the planet Saturn. But in the period of the contest between the two major planets, Jupiter and Saturn, the appellative of the dual gods became Adonai, which means my lords. Then, with the victory of Jupiter, it came to be applied to him alone. Immanuel Velikovsky.
The cradle of life. And this gets back to the idea of the Garden of Eden period in man's memory. If you're a satellite orbiting within that anode glow, and this is not an outrageous idea because astronomers have suggested the same thing for red giants, that planets could actually orbit within that star because the atmosphere is such low density. In fact, we orbit in the sun's atmosphere, if you like, and it doesn't cause us any trouble. But within that glowing shell, the radiant energy received from that envelope is constant over the entire globe. The light from the plasmasphere is not reflected light, it's radiant energy. Brown dwarfs radiate blue and ultraviolet light, even though they are cool at a temperature around 950 K. This is further evidence that we are looking at a mix of an electrical red anode glow and coronal ultraviolet blue end of the spectrum. There are no seasons, no tropics, and no ice caps. A planet does not have to rotate, its axis can point in any direction, and its orbit can be eccentric, and you'll still get this beautiful, even temperature over the whole body. The radiant energy received by the planet will be strongest at the blue and red ends of the spectrum, so photosynthesis, which relies on red light, would be very active. The skylight would be a pale purple, which maybe is referred to by the classical purple dawn of creation. And I know that in Canberra we have this new arboretum, which is fantastic, and all of the new trees that are being planted are put in red plastic to start with, and I asked the head of the arboretum why they did that, and he said the plants grow much better in red light. Water molecules dominate the spectra of brown dwarfs, so you want to know where the Earth's water came from? The light on Earth was dim and purplish amid a continuous mist of water. No other bodies in the system were visible. This is what Dave mentioned yesterday. This explains the abundant water on Earth and many satellites of the gas giant planets and the rings of Saturn. And the red light, warmth and water was ideally suited for giant ferns. It explains the gigantic lush vegetation found at the poles, fossilised as coal. Now, the problem faced by life on planets orbiting a red star, I think you saw last night, which was this flaring red dwarf. So this tendency to flare up is a problem. The reason for this is that, as I said, the red stars don't have the current regulation afforded by the bright photosphere. So the response of a red star to a sudden electrical disturbance in their environment is to shed charged matter in a flare-up. They may also change in apparent size as the anode glow accommodates to the electrical environment. I think this would account for the great dyings in the geological record and the episodic deposit of vast sediment and mineral layers on the Earth, and on other bodies too. Every body that's been looked at is layered. What's more, it explains for the first time the oceans of salty water on Earth. Comets cannot be responsible because they have little or no water and little or no sodium chloride. Now, just see how much of this I want to show you, because we saw this yesterday, so I might skip. This is referring to that super flare you saw yesterday, and you remember the astrophysicist said anyone who was on a planet orbiting that star at the time would be having a very bad day. Well, I think the Earth has had its bad days, and they're reflected in the geological record. So we'll skip that. The mass extinctions. As I said, those flare-ups can be so drastic that it would practically wipe out the life on any existing life on those satellites of that dwarf star. This raises an interesting side issue, and that is, ironically, intelligent life can't communicate through such a plasma shell using radio waves. So the lack of intelligible radio signals in the SETI project is understandable. In fact, denizens of such worlds would most likely be unaware of the universe at large. Now, astronomers also submit that orbiting a red dwarf is possibly one of the best places to look for life. What they've never considered is orbiting inside a red dwarf. Let me see. I don't think I'll talk about this one. This is a recent report of a spotty brown dwarf which suggests there are things orbiting within that red anode sheath, causing a dimming of the glow behind wherever that satellite happens to be. They're calling it weather, but of course if it's an anode glow it has nothing to do with weather. So we'll skip that. So this is a picture of the brown dwarf proto-Saturn as I see it. Now, there would have been many more bodies than you see there, but I've included Mars and Earth and proto-Saturn because they're the main players at this stage. 50% of red dwarfs have Earth-sized planets in their conventional habitable zone. This suggests there are a large number hidden inside the red star's glow. And you can say that too because our gas giants all have large numbers of satellites orbiting quite closely. But you'll note there is no Venus at this stage. Gigantism. It wasn't just pterodactyls that struggled to get up off the ground. Scaling of muscle and bone strength shows that dinosaurs could not have raised their bodies off the ground in today's gravity. For them to move about, Earth's gravity needed to be about 1/3 of today's. Global extinction and fossilization requires far more than a simple impact. Clearly, we have no understanding of the cause of gravity. is gravity electrical? Pardon. The question is of fundamental importance for cosmology and our understanding of the solar system. And the answer should provide insights into the demise of the dinosaurs, the sky our ancestors saw, and why they feared doomsday.
Folks, I think we're going to hold off on the Saturn and the Sun until next week. Getting kind of tired, and there's time to call it night. Please try to like the video, subscribe if you haven't. All the numbers and links are on my homepage. Please donate if you can. You're using this medicine you expect. And I just thank you for being here, joining another night with me. I know it's been hit or miss, but we're going to get it together, I promise. It's getting better every day. Take care. Much love. See you next time. Down the road. God bless. Take care.